Hello, this is Yarrow. Thanks for listening to my podcast today. One of the things I find really fascinating about being a human being and our collective nature as human beings is the way the world is full of massive numbers that we can't really comprehend with our individual brains. And also how, despite there being so many of so many different things, we tend to focus on only a few things. So let me give you some examples. Obviously, in the world of space, there's some crazy numbers. The sheer number of galaxies and planets and stars and, in the universe is something we simply can't comprehend. But more relevant examples, I think, for our day-to-day lives are the sheer size of the financial world, in particular, like the American economy. I remember just hearing some numbers and how there's just so much capital available there in the private and the public markets to be invested that there's a reason why a number like $100 billion doesn't have the same impact it might have had, 20, 30 years ago. I remember growing up thinking $1 million is like, that's rich. And nowadays, even just $1 billion would be the starting point, I think, for a lot of people, because we hear so much about trillion-dollar companies. Now, some of that's got to do with inflation and obviously, just the nature of business. It's always getting bigger, capitalism and so on. But even just the sheer number of available dollars to be invested, we can't really comprehend that. Similar to that is media. So social media, YouTube, the places where we go to consume content, we just don't really have a grasp of how much content is being produced because our little brains only consume a tiny little fraction of it every day. It's a perfect example. What you see on your feed, what you see on your YouTube page is this small selection of maybe a few hundred videos that you'll view of the, millions, hundreds of millions, billions of videos available that you'll never see. But collectively, all of us are all watching all this content. So there's billions of humans producing billions of different pieces of media, but we're all individually only seeing a slice of it. And that's, I think, deliberate. Our brains aren't designed to cope with big numbers. We're meant to be having a sort of finite experience where we have these certain routines we live with our lives. We have our friends, our family, our habits, our work, our pets, our meals. Maybe then you expand a little bit out to the media we consume. Generally, we tend to narrow in on a few channels we like to go back to, a few personalities we like to listen to over and over again. We just kind of, niche down. It very much ties into that idea of the long tail, which to me was one of the most amazing concepts that was born from the internet. It allowed this idea of the long tail to finally exist because it reduced the amount of friction for creation. Amazon.com was the first example of this, the best example, I think, to sort of illustrate it, where you had a physical bookshop. You could go in and see a selection of books, maybe thousands, and that's what you'll see. But there's way, way more books in the world than what was available in that bookshop. With Amazon, you remove the physical barriers. So suddenly every single book in existence, assuming it could be, printed and sold, was available on Amazon. So suddenly you had all these very obscure topics that could find their few hundred fans and customers. And that became known as the long tail. If you see it on a graph, it's this very, very long tail of small amounts of books being sold to a small amount of people. But it used to be just a few big hits would be gobbling up all the attention, all the money. But things like the long tail with books and obviously everything else online has allowed all kinds of micro niches to survive and even thrive. The idea of riches in the niches became even more significant with the internet, which basically means, you can find success by targeting a specific market. And even if you only have a few hundred customers, you can have a very successful business. Even if you only have a few thousand, true fans, as it's been called in the past, you can have a successful business. So I think it's an important lesson to remember, because the world of media, and I say this as a person who creates content. This is obviously for those of you building digital businesses. If you're producing things online, there is an element where you feel like you're throwing what you're producing out into this incredibly large ocean of content. How on earth can people find it? How on earth will you build an audience? How on earth will you get customers? But at the same time, understand that there's mechanisms in this world for the type of content to reach the right type of person. That is the whole point of niching down or having a specialization or being different, is the way the algorithms, the way humans search, the way we share content, the way we discover it is designed to be very personalized. And in the world of AI, that is becoming even more so. So perhaps the internet was this amazing invention for concepts like the long tail to come into focus. Now with AI, concepts like contextual matching have been magnified. So we always had contextual matching. Google was the first example of that, where what you search, and YouTube as well, what you search, all algorithms really, how you search, what you search, your behaviors or patterns start to teach the algorithm, and that's the context it uses to give you more of whatever it is you're looking for. With AI, it's creating an even deeper level of contextual matching. So it's learning not just your search habits, but every query, every conversation, as well as your search history and everything the internet already knows about you, is now being used to match you with answers and giving you contextual based answers too, because AI is conversational. So my point being here, obviously it's a bit of a ramble, but I was thinking about this, the sheer size of numbers, and how in some ways that's daunting, and it's hard to feel that you can stand out and find that audience. But that's actually the reason why there's opportunity, because the numbers are so large. There's an incredible amount of potential out there, because you only have to find that small slice of whatever it is you're looking for. And when I say small slice, that can be 1 million subscribers on a YouTube channel. That sounds like an incredibly huge number. But when you think about just the sheer volume of views every day on YouTube, 1 million is actually not that many. Like when you start getting, sure, billions of views, I mean, even that in many ways will start to seem like a normal number when it comes to something like total watch on a YouTube channel. So the point being, there's ample opportunity. The size of these markets, the size of these audiences are actually opportunities if you're willing to go out there and present something to a certain audience. And that is always the trick. It's always about having something that appeals to a certain group of people. Because if you don't have that appeal, and obviously you have to do things like learn how to market, learn how to do copywriting, learn how to sell, but ultimately it's still this big positioning that you go out there with your business or with your content and present and say, this is what we do and this is who we do it for. So if you're not clear on that, that's always going to be the biggest downfall from a purely strategic positioning standpoint. If you're not clear in your positioning, you're not going to get a clear type of customer. You're just not going to appeal to anyone. So if you're still kind of not sure, if you don't have that target customer or that target person in mind every time you create a piece of content, every time you go out there and create a video, even when you're planning a whole new business, products, offers, all of that needs to be born from this niche, this person or people you're going after. And understand there's a lot of them out there. There's all these billions of people online consuming online every single day. And your goal is to just get a small slice of that very, very large pie. Okay. Now, obviously, I do this podcast because I know my audience is a very small group of people who followed me possibly from a long time ago when I was doing a lot of blogging, a lot of teaching, a lot of content, a lot of podcasting. And those of you who still recently discover me, who are still following me for basically my content marketing advice, what I do and teach as a business owner right now, a digital marketer as well. If you are looking for a guide on how to grow your online business, in particular a service business like a coach, a freelancer, or an agency, head to insidegrowth.com/framework. You can download my full framework on how to grow from 10,000 a month to 100,000 a month, following these 5 phases that I've mapped out that I went through growing both of my 7-figure businesses. They're 2 different businesses. One was education coaching, another one's an agency. And I take you through the 5 phases. It's insidegrowth.com/framework. All right, that's it from me. I will talk to you later this week. Bye-bye.